because of Euro 7, the industry is changing, right? And the technology has to change, and how we look at brakes has to change. In the US today, dust isn't a big selling factor yet, right? Like, it's not a regulation, but it is coming.
This is Coffee Break. Today I'm with Sarah Olson, Vice President of Engineering and Strategic Partnerships at PureForge. I'm Brian Hagman. Let's go. You started your career as a friction formulator and spent years basically engineering the stuff that wears off the brakes. Now your whole job is making sure it does less of that. So what changed you or the industry?
Both, actually, but the industry definitely has shifted over the years. You know, when I got into friction, I actually started out in the rubber industry formulating. I moved into friction in 2004, and that was right when certain companies were coming out of still the Chapter 11 from asbestos, and the industry had changed there, right? So we have a long history of materials and emissions from that as well. And then, you know, for a long time, it was focused more on copper and reducing the copper, which in and of itself is an emission. So, you know, it's been a theme through brakes, just not with that word tied to it. And, you know, now Europe is officially regulated the amount of emissions, not necessarily the chemical composition of it, but the PM10 size coming out of it, and it is going to be probably adopted in other regions as well. The industry constantly is changing. Vehicles have evolved, right? We didn't have EVs like we have, you know, when I started working at braking. But I've also changed. I mean, I've learned a lot through the years and had the opportunity to work on many different aspects of the braking group. And now it's been really cool to be on the rotor side later in my career and getting to learn new things and reinvent kind of what this industry and what this component can do.
So when you started years ago, did anyone really talk about brake dust being an emission, or was it really more of kind of in my mind more of like a cosmetic issue where you had maybe some buildup on the wheel or whatever? But was that really something that was spoke about then?
You know, 20 years ago, dirty wheels weren't really as much of a concern. It was brought up, but it was more from a cosmetic, not from a health and safety. My first job in friction was in a factory, and then the test lab there. So the lab was the cleanest part, right? It wasn't. I mean, you whether you work in friction or rubber, where I started, they're pretty dirty. You know, you're just kind of used to that. You're conditioned for that, and even the customers. So it wasn't a focus, and I think even in the U.S. today, it's still not really a focus from a health and safety. There's not near as much awareness here as the potential health effects that it can have as there is now in Europe.
Is there anything that you learned in the formulating world that you don't think you could have learned anywhere else?
You know, formulating requires a lot of deductive thinking coming from an engineering background. You usually tackle one material aspect at a time. In formulation, you're dealing with chemical reactions as well as, you know, physical properties of the individual materials and the combination into a pad. So that deductive thinking and being able to combine kind of two different worlds or aspects of materials at once is something that's really unique to formulating that, you know, I don't think you necessarily get exposed to in other industries or other areas.
So let's talk about Euro 7. At some point in November, brake dust becomes a regulated emission in Europe. If you tested the brakes on the road right now, like how many would actually pass this?
There's a portion of them, especially the smaller vehicles that are on the road in Europe today, the heavier and more performance, like Class E, F, high performance SUVs, any of the delivery and transit type vehicles, like those typically wouldn't have passed with what has historically been at the EU6 regulation level. You know, it's a mixed bag, but there is definitely a shift even on the smaller vehicles as far as what they're going to do to solve that. There's even some vehicle performance changes. There's a speed requirement right in the test. So the slower you go, the less energy you put into a stop and the less dust you emit. So there's all sorts of different approaches that are being taken. But in the end, there's trade offs like with everything else. So to get emissions lower, you have to often put more costly components into the vehicle. Sometimes you sacrifice other attributes such as noise, or and like on the whole vehicle level, like I was giving the example of speed, even on some manufacturers have chosen that route, right, to meet the compliance more easier to meet.
Got it. So who's more exposed right now? Is it the OEMs? Is it the whole aftermarket segment, or is it basically everybody?
From an exposure standpoint, the near term is the OEMs because that's how the regulation is being rolled out. This year it's brand new platforms. 27, it'll be everything, all new manufacturing that has to meet the EU7. It's a whole vehicle regulation, right? And braking emissions is for the first time included as a requirement in that. So the OEMs have the near term. They have to come up with a solution to have a new vehicle that they can roll out. For the aftermarket, in general, for brakes, it's usually 4 or 5, even longer on some vehicles before you do your first brake job yet, right? Usually within that warranty period is the target for an OEM manufacturer. So, you're looking down the road a little bit before it starts hitting that regulation because any vehicle on the road today is grandfathered in under the EU6 or whatever version that it was released as a original vehicle, as a new vehicle. The aftermarket is still not sorted out though. That's one of the big things still being discussed, how you would qualify, what families of vehicles and brakes have to be tested to be compliant as an independent aftermarket material, even to the point of for an annual inspection on a vehicle, how do you validate or verify that the brakes you have on your car meet the requirement, right? Whether it's OEM or aftermarket. So there's a lot of details that go into this type of regulation that are still being worked out as it rolls out. And every year there are new updates and revisions to it. There'll be a few minor ones that are coming out in October that'll be voted on in Geneva again, and I anticipate that will continue. So the aftermarket piece really hasn't been figured out yet. There's lots of discussion and work going into it, but it's not finalized.
Got it. Now, I know Asia is kind of even progressing maybe on their own type of regulations when it comes to brake dust emissions. Do you anticipate that the industry will try to collaborate together or come together to work on like some sort of universal regulation? Or are we literally going to have maybe multiple sets of testing we have to do, multiple sets of regulations we have to go by depending on the location, the area?
For the first part, for China 7, they do reference the WLTP dyno procedure, the actual schedule that's being run. It's a recommended standard, right? Not a regulation with hard limits on it, but that is anticipated to progress. But there is an additional dyno schedule that they've got in there as optional as well for CARB and what's happening in the US. They've got their own CBDC cycle that they've run, but also aware of the WLTP. So, to bring it back to your question, as an industry, I think everyone would prefer that we use one test schedule and one methodology and one pieces of equipment, right? As far as dynos and the capture and everything that goes with that. To get that done, though, all the different countries and legal entities, bodies within that have to agree to that. Everyone kind of wants it to represent their own state or country or whatever. So there's a lot of discussion going on right now as far as the difference between running a test to predict how much emissions is truly happening, right, in a given state or country, and really map or model the emissions in the real world versus a test procedure for the purpose of a kind of quality control. And this is, comparison A to B. This A is better than B is better than C, et cetera, and to have a consistent testing procedure. So that work is going on globally right now. Europe is set. That is the WLTP. So that is kind of the standard or the front runner that's already out there. So the question becomes, as these other countries, including the US, come on board, will that suffice for what they're trying to accomplish, or is another one needed? And there's a lot of discussion around that.
What role does electric vehicles play in this? With the regen braking, does that make it easier for a vehicle to pass the test, the regulations, or does it make it more complicated? Like, where does that play?
In general, yes. However, there's two caveats. So in Europe, for instance, the 2026-27 regulation is 7 milligrams per kilogram for a standard ICE vehicle. But for EVs, it's 3, right? So it's less than half that they require of the EVs. However, it's also has what they call a brake factor. So if you run a test, if you have an ICE vehicle, you take the number at face value, so a multiplier of one, essentially. If you have a full EV, it assumes that only 17% of the braking is done by the standard brakes and 83% is done by regenerative braking. So you get to multiply that by 0.17. So your actual reported number is much lower to meet that three. In general, as well, EVs tend to use, I'll just say, less aggressive type materials. So the EVs are looked at as a solution, but they're not the end all be all solution.
And since you use the brake less, where does the rust come in play or some things like that? If the car sits there and the person doesn't necessarily drive it for a couple days and they're not really using their brakes at all. I know obviously the lifespan of the brake pad and rotor can last longer, but does that complicate things at all, or is that already taken into consideration?
I mean, it goes back a little bit to you run a test on a dyno for a purpose of, running a test and saying this is what a potential amount of emissions or dust could be emitted, right? But in real life, everything else happens, right? You get sand in there if you're in a beachy area. Corrosion is a big issue in braking for many reasons, that being one of them on EVs. But yeah, in reality, if you get corrosion on there, you are removing that, which therefore is dust and definitely not captured on a dyno, right? So you have that. Does this test really represent what's happening in the real world? You're never going to have that 100%. But yeah, that is a big issue that you're still going to get some of that.
Now, you were at EuroBrake not too long ago, I guess back in June, and you presented some results of tests for the PureForge rotor. Can you share some details on that? What that is, what it was, and I guess the reaction you got? Positive? Was it skepticism? What was it?
Yeah. We ran on the VW Golf, and the regulation is 7 milligrams per kilometer, and our results came in at 3.3. Now that's a brake factor. When you run the test, it gives you one corner, right? So say the front driver's side wheel, and then you have a multiplication factor that gives you a full vehicle estimate for the actual regulation. You have to run each individual one, front and rear. So ours came in around one. So it's a 3.3 milligrams per kilometer. We got a really good reaction. We ran with the OE pads, no special development there, standard low steel, and just our proprietary rotor treatment. One of the unique things about our product is that it molecularly changes the surface structure and the chemistry. And so because of that, it forms a unique and very stable transfer layer, especially with low steel and semi-mat pad. And we got a lot of interest. There's a lot of the general energy and conversations we had was, it's a new regulation, it's new technologies they're being put out there as first run solutions in November. And there's a lot of uncertainty still around that, given so anytime you have another technology that could offer, an alternative to that, that is a huge plus. So we have a lot of interest in that. A lot more testing is going to happen because of that, which is exciting for us, which was my main goal, just to get interest in, let's look at it on different applications. We just have a really unique solution from that. We only treat about 4 microns deep in the surface, and it's a treatment. So there's no delamination, no cracking, no, things like that can happen with other technologies. If it fails, you just go back to the standard rotor. So there's a bit more safety in that and a bit less of a change from what is currently out there today from a failure mode standpoint, right? Some of the new technologies out there that they're putting out have some really unique failure modes that nobody that's in automotive likes new failure modes. We all have to rank them on our FMEAs, and that's always a big stressor. So in general, at EuroBrake, one thing that really surprised me, there was less conversation this year compared to last year about the technologies. Obviously, ours was new that I was presenting, but there was a lot more talk about testing, quality controls, inline quality production, because these new technologies are new. So I found that really interesting. There was a lot of work around that in companies there talking about inline quality control solutions.
This episode is brought to you by Hagman Search. When it comes to finding top-tier talent for your executive team, Hagman Search is a name you can trust. Not simply a recruiting firm, it's your strategic partner. Go to hagmansearch.com to learn more. Yeah, I unfortunately was not able to attend, but I heard it was really well attended. I heard there was over 1,000 people at the event. Do you think Euro 7 was the main reason for that? Do you think that's the reason why?
I think that has a big influence because it's because of Euro 7, the industry is changing, right? And the technology has to change and how we look at brakes has to change. The other big difference that I noticed this year, even compared to last year, and maybe it was just an awareness, there's a lot of Chinese manufacturers that were there as well. Like Neo was actually on the OEM panel, Cherry was there, BYD. So it was a different mix of attendees. I've seen a lot of reports on LinkedIn, various ones on just the whole car park in Europe is changing and who those manufacturers are. And I think with Euro 7 and the new regulations coming out, brakes aren't the only thing, right, that's changing with that it will continue to push that change and that shift. So it was a lot more attendees, but also some additional names that maybe we haven't seen in the past.
No, that's great. I want to talk about PureForge. So, for those listening that may not be familiar with PureForge, the name, the company, the product, can you just maybe share just kind of a brief overview of kind of like who you guys are and what you do?
So we're a rotor treatment company. We're covered by 47 patents. So we're really a technology and IP company. Our rotor treatment is done in a PVD process at relatively low temperatures, under 300 C and around 4 microns. So we can adjust that, but today that's the product that we have in the market is in that range. So it's really thin and it doesn't involve the process itself doesn't involve any additional thermal stresses since it's relatively low temperature. It doesn't have any mechanical stresses because it's in a PVD chamber, so it doesn't have any, if nothing's touching it from that standpoint, and it doesn't care what shape it is, right? Again, it's in a chamber, so there's no distance requirement or size requirement there, so it's very flexible. What we've seen in the market we've targeted and been really successful in the US is police, first responders, and fleets, right? We're looking at a overall value proposition. We offer exceptional longevity. We've got a 3-year, 100,000-mile warranty out there on our parts. The rotors, if used with our pads and, properly maintained calipers and all of that, the whole system is operating together, really won't wear. It'll last the life of the vehicle. We have some rotors back that have 100,000 miles on them. And you can still see the initial grind marks on them from before we treated them. So, it really is a unique treatment on that. Because it doesn't wear, it also doesn't make dust, right? It has an incredibly stable transfer layer. The pads last 3 to 5 times longer as well as compared to a standard grit cast iron rotor. So there's a lot of benefits there. We've seen noise improvements specifically on the Tahoe. That I was just at a PFE conference in Orlando, and that was a hot topic of discussion there on those noisy Tahoes. Our product solves that problem. So we've been really successful in that. And like there's a huge total cost of ownership benefit if you don't have to change your rotors ever and your fleet vehicles are out on the road, from a safety benefit. When they aren't fading, they're lasting. You don't have to worry about if you're in a pursuit situation. We manage the heat very effectively through our stable transfer layer. So there's a lot of advantages there. We've had track result on various different police department EVOC tests on track that have been outstanding. And, we're up to around 8 million miles on the road now on vehicles. So just talking to some of the officers is really cool at the conference this week. One of the fleet managers, I gave a presentation just on kind of brakes 101, brake forensics and problem solving for the conference as a training. And one of the guys stood up and, was being a big advocate for our product, how much time and money it saved them and fixing the noise issues. That's pretty cool. That feels good when you work for a product that is people are happy with and is actually a solution to some, and really benefiting their day-to-day jobs. So that's been really cool. So yeah, in the US, we're police and fleet looking to expand into commercial vehicle and class 8 for Euro 7 that we were talking about earlier. That doesn't go into effect till 2030. So those systems for air disc brakes are still under development. The testing's still under development, but we're looking to offer that as well as a next generation product, both for the US and for Europe.
Wow. So with your rotors, do you have to use a specific brake pad application? Do they have to use PureForge pads? Can they use any pads?
Yeah, we recommend that you use PureForge pads only, and that is the only way our warranty is valid because we've tested those. and we validated those and we have confidence in them. In general, our treatment, because of the chemistry, seems to perform better with semi-metallic or low met, so steel type pads. NEOs we just haven't done a lot with because that's not the markets that we've been going after. So we just don't have as much experience with those. We are currently testing with several different PAB formulations globally and continuing to expand that knowledge base. But right now, for what's available in the US, we recommend only using our pads and we sell them as a kit.
I know a lot of folks are talking about, a lot of the solutions are going to be coatings. Like you talked about like laser cladding, things like that. Why is PureForge a better option in your opinion than those solutions?
Well, I mentioned earlier we fail safe. So if something happens, if you get a rock or the caliper hangs up and you're just getting crazy amounts of wear and it's super hot or something and it causes the treatment to wear through. There's always those extreme situations, especially in brakes, it seems like. You're just on a standard rotor now. So you're gonna stop. Your car is gonna stop. With some of the other options like the laser cladding, I mean, there is a significant risk if corrosion gets under there, if there's thermal or mechanical stresses throughout the process that haven't been relieved, that you'll get material warping, you'll get delamination and cracking. If you have a whole chunk just flake off, can cause a pretty big problem, right? And so some of the failure modes, it also has significant different material properties. So one issue that is potential that I've heard is noise can be a lot harder to solve. Ours tend to, at least with what we've done in the police pursuit products that we have to take, tends to be quieter, if anything. I think because we have a really stable transfer layer, and anytime you create a stable environment for friction and braking, that inherently introduces less vibration and excitement and will be directionally better for noise. So that is also another advantage that we offer.
The US, since the US doesn't necessarily have, the regulations for brake dust and, brake emissions right now. So what's the biggest selling point why fleets would choose why are they choosing PureForge? Like, is there one thing that kind of closes the deal more than others? Is it the cost? Is it the durability? Is it the amount of miles they get on a rotor?
Yeah, I mean, for fleets specifically, long mile type stuff, it's definitely total cost of ownership, right? It's the durability. It's the fact that your car's not coming in. I mean, if you can switch your brake repairs to, I don't even have to look at them until I'm changing tires out, right? And get a whole new repair sequence that's uptime, let alone the cost you're avoiding on parts and labor, doing brake jobs. I mean, there's some police fleets that'll be changing out brakes every 8 or 10,000 miles. That's pretty costly, right? So it's a cost and uptime. For police specifically, there's a safety factor and not just in the reliability. In the US today, dust isn't a big selling factor yet, right? Like it's not a regulation, and for end users, it's not, but it is coming.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, so CARB, do you think CARB, which is, I guess, the California Air Resources Board. So I know they're obviously very active. Do you think they're going to try to push something soon in the US, or you think they're going to wait to kind of see how Euro 7 plays out? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so there was a recent webinar that CARB held with looking at emissions overall. So it's a whole initiative, but brake emissions is part of that. In that, it was verbally stated that they were looking to implement emissions regulations similar to EU7 by 2031, but that's not in writing. There was a public comment period through the end of July. The BMC had a nice letter that they put together with their concerns with the current status of that. And then I'm the chair of the brake linings SAE standards. And so that in conjunction with the other standards committees, we reopened the brake environmental task force, specifically looking at from a technical standpoint, how can we interact with California and CARB and advise them on the testing standards and the technical piece of it and how they can potentially roll that out. So that is happening now. We have another meeting on August 21st for anyone wanting to get involved and be up to date on what's going on with CARB.
Oh, well, yeah. And talking about regulations, so you recently joined a SAE task force. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, that's the one we just started again. Our main mission is to provide technical expertise to CARB, right? Like we're not political. We're not gonna have a position on it. but to compare test procedures, for instance. So CARB has their CBDC, which is their California driving cycle that they ran as part of their initial study to collect the data for what they're basing it off of, right? In general, it's a little considered more severe than the WLTP that EU7 is using. So, when we were talking earlier about combining test procedures and those kinds of things, one of our main objectives is to outline the differences, talk about possible consolidations or compromises, pluses and minuses on using either one. But obviously, if California insists on using an entirely different dyno procedure, then that would require, completely repeating any testing. And the EU7 testing would not be valid for regulations here. So that is one of the main objectives, amongst others, within that task force.
Gotcha. And speaking of SAE, so before we wrap up, the SAE Brake Colloquium is right around the corner. I know you'll be there.
Yep.
So I guess if you're there, how can people find you, and how can they get a hold of some of these test results that you guys have?
So I'm not presenting a technical presentation this year, but I will be giving an update on Monday at 4:00 session. We have SAE standards. So all of the different committees will be giving a short update on what we're doing in addition to this new task force. So if you're interested, please come to that and we'll all be there so we can get you involved there. PureForge has a booth, so I will be there as well as some of my colleagues. So please stop by the booth anytime or reach out on LinkedIn. Those are probably the easiest ways if you don't have my direct contact information.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Always great to talk to you, and can't wait to do it again sometime.
All right. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it.